If you've been around for a while, you know that I've had some strong opinions on things throughout the years. And I have continued to come back here and update you on things that I don't necessarily agree with anymore that I've said before, or just blatantly say, hey, I was wrong. And today, we are back at it again. Specifically, we're going to talk about 3 exercises or types of movement patterns that I have deemed bad or risky in the past. And I'm going to talk to you today about why my opinions have changed. But before we jump into that, if this is your first time here, my name's Justina. I'm a personal trainer based out of New York City. And one of my big goals as a coach is to help make you stronger and smarter by giving you the basics of strength and nutrition. If that sounds good to you, I would love for you to hit that subscribe button if you have not already, so you get notified when my latest video pops up. With that being said, let's dive into the first movement pattern that I have deemed unsafe or risky in the past that I now practice myself. All right, so this is the big one. I think a lot of you have seen this, a lot of you have commented on this, but it is barbell back squats. So earlier this year, I started working with a friend of mine, Dr. Katie Dabrowski, who is a strength and conditioning coach and physical therapist based out of Miami, and she has helped me build up my mileage. We're hoping to run a half next year while also maintaining and preserving my strength. One of the big things that we've talked about together is the fact that I'm very quad and hamstring dominant, and my glutes just have a hard time joining the party. A lot of that I've just learned from like my training history and also being in physical therapy previously. But the reason we're trying to even this out is because it has led to some hip issues, which have popped up here and there over the years. So I have found that when I'm really trying to load my glutes a little bit more, take some of that work off of my hamstrings as my main hip extender, I feel a lot better. So one of the big movement patterns that was kind of missing in my programming was a squat that was a little more glute biased rather than quad biased. Katie put these in my program. I told her I never really trained these. She offered to swap them out for something else, but I was like, hey, I'll trust the process. I trust you. If I absolutely hate them after a few weeks, we can always move into something else. So that was back in July. It is currently November, and I've been working on back squats since then. They have not left my program. I've gone from a very tentative 95 pounds all the way up to 155 pounds. So that's where I'm at right now. Let me explain a little bit about where my hesitation grew from with back squats when I was making these claims about, not enjoying them or not working on them with clients because they were too risky. So first and foremost, one of the first big certifications that I got was CFSC, Certified Functional Strength Coach, which is through Mike Boyle. And I got that back in 2021, I think. I got a photo of baby Justina. I'll pop up here. But one of the things that Mike Boyle says is that spinal loading is not worth the risk versus reward. Spinal loading basically just means putting load directly onto your spine, which a back squat is going to do that. And while I do think that Mike Boyle is a net positive, I think that and a few other of his takes are not great in hindsight. But at the time, this was someone I really respected. I respect a lot of the people with this certification. Overall, I still think it's a great cert, especially if you got like a basic CPT and you're not really clear on, strategic programming. I think it's excellent, but we're not always meant to agree with everybody's take, right? So that was kind of the first take that I had. The thing that sealed the deal was when I first started learning how to use barbells. I was going to this gym. I'm not going to name any names, but it was very like CrossFit-esque where there's a workout of the day, there's different stations, you just have like a coach or two kind of walking around checking form. And overall, this taught me a lot going to these classes. Unfortunately, and this is on me and nobody else, there was a day where it was bright and early, didn't warm up properly, back squats were on the menu, there were 10s on the bar, and I was like, load up 25s. And I went down into my squat and immediately threw out my back. Again, that's on me, that's not on the gym or the trainer. But between Mike Boyle and the injury, I went, I'm never doing these. So fast forwarding now, I definitely have updated thoughts. Like anything else, I think that barbell back squats have a time and a place. And when we are thinking of risk versus reward, I would say that's always going to be on a spectrum. Barbell back squats, I think, are just a little bit more of an advanced exercise, which increases the risk. But when we're selecting any exercise, it comes down to a number of different things. What adaptation are you looking for? What is your current tissue tolerance versus the programming that you're doing? And what do you enjoy or want to get good at? If you're somebody who wants to work on a glute biased squat variation that you can really load up, this is it. This is the one. But if you're my client and you want to start doing barbell back squats, I'm going to make sure that you're ready for them. What does ready mean? Number one, have you ever squatted with external load placed anywhere on your body? If the answer is no, I'm probably going to establish a solid baseline for you. More than likely going to start with a goblet squat, move to some free weight dumbbell front squats, and then potentially move into barbell back squats. I want to make sure that your squat mechanics are pristine before I'm putting load on your spine. You understand how to brace your core. And since the bar by itself already weighs 45 pounds, I want to make sure that you can squat at least that with free weights. Typically, my clearance is going to be a set of 25s on the shoulder. Can you do that for 3 sets of 10? Yes, the bar is inherently more stable and we don't actually have to hold the weight up with our arms, but this is going to give us a lot more strength and confidence to switch into the barbell. Now, a lot of people, myself included, end up hurting themselves in a barbell back squat is because they either go too heavy, they have too much volume, maybe they don't understand proper bracing mechanics, but that could technically happen with any exercise. Again, it's on a spectrum. And because we are loading on the spine, the risk goes up a little bit. But if you have a good chunk of training history, great squat mechanics, and you're programming it appropriately for where your current strength is at, the reward is huge. Huge payoffs. The reason for this is because you are taking 3 joints, hip, knee, and ankle through huge ranges of motion under load. So basically it's an exercise where you're gonna get a big bang for your buck. I think other things to consider with the type of squat that you're choosing is the mobility factor. You know, with a back squat, you need a lot of shoulder external rotation and extension. If you wanna work on a front squat, you're gonna need a lot of wrist extension. So I think a lot of this squat patterning that you're choosing really comes down to meeting yourself where you're at in terms of strength and in terms of where your body likes to move in space. A number of my clients they just run a little more nervous. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, we're meeting people where they're at. Maybe they want to work on loading up a squat pattern, but they get really nervous under a barbell. If you have a Smith machine, that's going to be an excellent option because it's going to take out the instability factor, but we can still get some nice external load on the body. And also at the end of the day, if you don't want to do back squats, you don't have to. There is always another squat variation or another exercise in general that can typically produce a similar or the same adaptation. Unless you're an athlete or someone with a very specific goal, you probably can just pick things that feel better and work better on your body and call it a day. So those are my updated thoughts on back squats. Let's move into the second exercise. So I still stand by the fact that body weight crunches aren't really going to move the needle forward in any significant way. But I do think that there's a time and a place for them or variations of them. In the past, I actually don't think I've ever said that crunches are dangerous. I think I've just said that they're like unnecessary, or like a waste of your time. And I'm at the point now where I'm like, if I'm not going to demonize or like poo-poo someone's exercise selection because we're living in a society where like a quarter of Americans are even meeting the basic movement guidelines. So if you like doing crunches, do your crunches, okay? I'm going to help educate you on where you can fill in the blanks. But you know, when I think of crunches, that's going to be working through spinal flexion, which is focused on the abdominals. And typically people program crunches for one of 3 reasons. Number 1 is going to be spot reduction, I hear a lot, which basically means they think that that's burning the fat on the midsection to see more abdominals. And that's actually just not how the body works. We cannot choose where we lose fat from. The best, I forget who I learned this from or who said this recently, but the best metaphor or analogy that I heard was spot reduction is the same idea as trying to take water out of just the deep end of the pool. Isn't that the best? Your body is going to choose where you lose fat based on your genetics. So doing crunches is not going to like isolate the fat in that area. It is going to isolate the muscle though, which brings me into the second reason why a lot of people do crunches is because they want to get their core stronger. Specifically, this exercise is really just going to be working your rectus abdominis or your abs, those six-pack muscles. They're in charge of spinal flexion or that crunching movement. And this is a good option for building up ab strength and ab muscle to a point. But eventually, if we're going by the guidelines of progressive overload, we do want to be adding resistance to this. So this is why for a lot of people, I'm going to recommend instead of just doing like 100 crunches, we can use our time a lot wiser. Maybe we can go to a cable machine, get some cable crunches in there. Maybe we can find a bar to hang off of and do some like leg raises. There's a lot of other options in terms of progressing crunches other than just doing more and more and more reps. And then the third reason why I hear a lot of people want to do crunches is simply because they really like that feeling of like getting a nice core burn. And that I think is a great reason to do crunches. Specifically, I do have a client actually. She's a remote client, so I just write her programming. She loves feeling her core at the end of a workout. She's like, I love doing core work. I love feeling that ab burn. Please always program something to burn out the core at the end. And so half of getting people to show up for their workouts is getting them to enjoy it. So if this client of mine wants to do ab or core work that gets that like burning feeling, you bet your sweet ass we're putting that in. We're making time for it. So just remember that like exercise selection does not always need to be the most optimal thing, because sometimes optimal just means like, does it get you to show up? So if me putting some crunches in there gets this client to show up for her workouts, that's a great workout. That's a functional workout right there. So in moving into this last chunk, this is kind of like a bunch of different exercises, but things that I've talked about being like dangerous or unnecessary are things like hip dip planks or any type of side bending at the spine. So basically anything like bendy with the spine. That's the scientific term, right? I feel like this got drilled into me when I worked at a Megaformer studio. Again, we're not naming any names, but this was really early on in my career. So like anytime anybody who knew more than me said something, I took it as like, this is written in stone. And no shade to this business. I learned so much when I worked there. I would not be the coach that I am today without a lot of the mentorships that I got working at this place. But this was just like part of their ideology. And the thing that I've learned over the years, which is so cool about like being independent and learning from all of these different experts, is that you then kind of get to like form your own ideology. So that's been something that I've really been trying to do, especially over this past year. But I think I just fell into this trap of the anti-core movement. So like anti-extension, anti-flexion, anti-rotation, all of these anti-things where those are functions of your spine or your core, but you also need to be able to move your spine and your core through movement patterns. And as long as, like anything else, you can handle the external load that you're putting on, it's not only safe to do so, it's really beneficial. Because what happens if your spine meets a huge force rapidly in day-to-day life and you've never put any load on it? Yeah, you're gonna fucking hurt your spine. I have already made an entire video breaking down like functional core training and what that means to me. And basically that just means that we're training our core to resist and create movement. And ideally, if you have the strength for it, doing that loaded. I think in general, a lot of the exercises that I deemed like silly or maybe even like inherently too risky, like the hip dip planks, like the lateral side bending, things like that. I think those are actually great filler exercises to hit things that you're not necessarily hitting through big compound lifts. So I'll include a lot of that stuff in warm-ups or finishers or as accessory movement based on the individual client and what they're looking for. And once again, the big takeaway that we can take from this video is that the only risky movement is the one that you are not prepared for. And I think those are the three big things that I used to talk shit on. If you can remember something else, please let me know down in the comments and I will address it. But as always, I really appreciate you guys being here and not only like listening to what I have to say, but also listening when I walk it back and correct myself and learn more. I think that in this industry, it's really important to keep an open mind, listen to everybody in terms of experts and listen to your clients as well, because you're going to get so much more information and education about what your values are. If you have any questions, as always, please leave them down below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos, and I will see you in the next one.